Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Hersey. Happy Thursday to each of you. And on behalf of the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, welcome to today's webinar entitled Empowering the Futures of Youth, Sharing Information to Prevent Youth Substance Use. This webinar is being made available through a collaboration of the Florida Department of Children and Families and the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. Please note that as an attendee, you are in listen-only mode and are only able to view your name. Your webcam and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions, please send them to the presenter and myself, the host, FATA Webinars, by using the chat panel. The button to open the panel is usually located on the upper right side of your monitor. Please use the chat panel to send any questions you may have as you think of them. The presenter will address questions as time permits. Audio is broadcast through the internet to your computer. If you experience poor computer audio at any time during today's presentation, there are a few options to try using the Communicate menu. One of these options is on the screen now, and all options are posted at the top of the chat panel as well. After ensuring that your volume, both on your computer and external speakers, if applicable, is not lowered, you may click the Communicate menu, then click the Audio Connection panel. Click Disconnect, follow the first two steps again, and click Call in using computer and follow the instructions. If you continue to experience poor audio through your computer, try using the I will call in option under the Communicate menu. The access code and event password are on your screen and again at the top of your chat panel. You must be connected to the audio of this presentation as well as view it on screen to receive a certificate of attendance. We are unable to verify attendance if you are not connected to WebEx via your computer or mobile device. Therefore, audio-only attendees are not eligible for a certificate of attendance or CEUs. The recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on the FATA website within 30 business days. To access the recording in PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org. Navigate to the Resource Center and click on Training Library as shown on the screen. FATA produces many webinars and workshops through the support of the Florida Department of Children and Families. To help participants track credits earned through attendance, we host an online community that provides a personalized digital journal where participants can maintain statements of credit for webinars and workshops taken through the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association. At the end of today's webinar, your web browser will direct you to an evaluation form on the FATA website. You will first need to register or sign in to your account to complete the evaluation. Please ensure that your name and email address match your webinar attendance. Information you provide FATA as part of registering remains confidential. Statements of credit will be posted within 30 business days after the evaluation closes, and individual professional development journals for persons completing the evaluation and attending the entire webinar. Completing the evaluation is necessary to receive CE credits or to access your statement of credit. Please note that the evaluation will close at midnight on Tuesday, February 13th, 2024. Up to 2 continuing education credits are available for participating in today's webinar for persons licensed through the Board of Nursing, the Board of Clinical Social Work, Marriage and Family Therapy, Mental Health Counseling, and for persons credentialed through the Florida Certification Board. If you are a licensed healthcare practitioner, be sure to include your Florida license number for reporting to CE Broker when you register with our site for the first time. If you are certified with the Florida Certification Board or licensed outside the state of Florida, you do not need to provide your certification number when you register with our site. Please note that WebEx monitors the arrival and departure of attendees and provides a report upon completion of the event. We are not permitted to provide a certificate of attendance if you do not attend the entire webinar, and we are not permitted to provide partial CE credit. We encourage you to complete the survey as soon as possible. If you experience technical difficulties accessing the survey, please fill out a contact form at www.fata.org or email training@floridabha.org before the evaluation closes. This presentation is intended solely for educational purposes. The views, opinions, information, and content expressed in the presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or policies of the state of Florida, the Florida Department of Children and Families, the Florida Alcohol and Drug Abuse Association, or the Florida Behavioral Health Association. Attendees should note that sessions are recorded and published in various media. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Worsham L. L is a licensed clinical social worker, certified family trauma professional, and trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator. With over 15 years of experience, she empowers vulnerable youth and families in various settings, including community, medical, academic, residential, and child welfare. L specializes in the treatment of complex trauma and the implementation of trauma-informed care. L is passionate about educating professionals and caregivers on the impact of complex and historical trauma. She has trained over 2,500 professionals and was nominated as a top healthcare provider of 2017 by the International Association of Healthcare Professionals. Her bachelor's degree is in psychology from Loyola University, and she received her master's degree in clinical social work from the University of Chicago. And now I'd like to welcome our presenter, Elle. Elle, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Peace. As you all know, my name is Elle. I'm really excited to spend the afternoon with you all talking about how we can empower our youth so that they are making good decisions as it relates to substance use, achieving abstinence, or at least delaying their initiation of use. And so we'll go ahead and get started by reviewing today's objectives, what we can expect in the time that we're here together. First, we want to look at and identify what perceived norms are and how they influence the substance use of youth. This is very, very important when we're thinking about youth and child development because of the influence of peers, adults, media, and other things that our children are intaking. So we also want to make sure that we're understanding the psychological aspects that contribute to these behaviors and how we can address them so that we are able to reshape the perceptions of the youth, so that we are then helping to help delay their initiation of use or prevent their use altogether. And we'll use the historical context of youth substance use and to inform our current and future prevention efforts, because there's been, since the 50s or 60s, there's been a lot of efforts around preventing youth use, and we have learned a lot. And so we want to then apply our social norms approach so that we can prevent substance use among youth, and we'll dive into what that looks like and have some practice utilizing the substance or the social norms approach. But before we hop into that, I would like everyone to just kind of chat and use the chat box if it's available to you, and let me know what role you're in with youth, right? Are you a caregiver, a case manager, a probation officer, a clinician? What role are you engaging, parent, caregiver, that you're engaging the youth with, so that as we're talking about the social norms approach, we can think about the contextualization of this information. So we have a JEL, clinicians, counselors, therapists, prevention specialists, outreach specialists, social work, schools, community organizations, nursing. Okay. Wonderful. So we have an amazing amount of knowledge in the room at 247 participants. We're across different settings, right? So at some point in our adult lives, whether it be it professionally or even as adults in the community, we are going to come across youth. And so this information will help us to utilize ourselves as adults and the influential adults that we can be in youth's lives to help give the information that's going to help shift the youth towards making good decisions and giving and engaging in those behaviors that we desire. So I thank you, everyone, for using this chat box. We'll continue to engage in the chat box. So this webinar is going to be very interactive. So I do encourage you all to use the box in order to provide your feedback. So perception influences behavior is something that we have found, and the youth perceptions of their peers' use associated with an increased use in substances. And actually, on contrary to belief of most adults and children alike, vast majority of youth do not use any substances. Was anybody surprised that vast majority of American youth do not use any substances? Especially when we're working in the fields where we're specifically focused on and working with youth who are engaging in substance use or who may be in treatment, etc. Sometimes the overgeneralization or seeing it in the media, what's happening with the youth and the epidemics or pandemics that are occurring can also cause us to believe that this is happening at a larger rate than it's actually happening. And so what we want to do is begin to understand how we can use the information to help encourage the behaviors that we desire, as opposed to using scare tactics in other ways or statistics that are scary in order to influence our youth. So when we think about what this looks like, there's actually a research study that was done across several thousands of students, 650,000 students to be exact, across 25 countries through the years of 2009 and 2015. And what they looked at were the student attitudes and behaviors. And while only 5% of their peers were engaging in only 86% of their peers were not drinking. 5% of those actually believed that. So that means that majority of the youth, 95% of them, thought that most of their peers were using, even though it was under 13, it was 13% that's actually using, right? Similarly, 70% of ninth graders don't drink, but only 15% of their classmates believe that to be true, right? And so we see that the youth are overestimating the number and the percentages of youth or peers that are using substances and engaging in substance use, which is a shift and causes the youth to engage in use at an earlier age, or even it causes them to think that it's cool to engage in use and something to do in order to get acceptance. So before we go on to this next slide, I want for us to just take a moment and think about, in this chat box here, what influences youth perception? What are we noticing that's influencing youth perception? Where are they getting these beliefs from? We have peers, social media, images, family, movies, their friends, attitude, music, entertainment industry, older siblings, sometimes the parents, those that they're hanging with. So we see that there are a number of things that are influencing the youth, relationship-wise, but as well as those things that they're seeing and hearing, right? Celebrities. And so what we want to do is be mindful around how these children are being perceived, how these children are coming to find themselves having the perceptions that they're having. We furthermore want to think about what are some ways or questions that we can begin asking the youth to begin getting an understanding of what they're perceiving, right? So what's a question that you can ask a youth that you're working with to get an understanding of their perception about their peers' use? What can we ask to learn more about their perceptions? And we'll see later that by thinking strategically about what type of questions we're asking, that's going to help us guide. It's going to help us to guide the identification of the data, the statistics, and the assessments that we're using in order to deliver the appropriate messages that we like. So we have, what is your opinion of substances? How do you think all of your peers use substances? I'm sorry, do you think all of your peers use substances? Be transparent with teens that don't do fake. Randy, great point. You have to be very transparent and authentic in your engagement with them. The other question is, what do they do for entertainment? Social media, TV, internet. What do you think about drug and alcohol use? Have they learned or were they exposed to use? What are the pros and cons of using substances? How common do you think it is for other high school students to use substances, or middle school students, depending on the age you're working with? Tell me what kids your age do for fun. Why do you believe your peers are using? Tell me the involvement of substances. What are you into these days? Tell me about what you think is driving you and your peers to what to use. Assess them and ask if they use. How does the media shape their view of substance use? What's your favorite mode of social media talking about substance use? Why do you think some of your peers choose? So these are really great questions. Some are straightforward, some are open-ended that allow the students to provide what their insights are, where as adults, if we ask open-ended questions to youth, it gives us the opportunity to hear and understand their line of thinking and train of thinking so that we are able to identify where we need to intervene as the adults, where we can guide their decision-making to, where we can guide their exploration and consideration to. How do you think your friends feel about drug use? So these are great questions that are going to be really important as we're working with youth, because each youth that we sit across from is an individual. And so the impact of their peers, the impact of their family, they're all going to have intricate ways in which they interact with one another. And so what we're going to do today is really focus on how do we understand child and youth development and how their brains are impacted by perception, how their brains are impacted by their peers, and what their developmental tasks are, as well as the impact of family and important adults, so that we're able to use the developmental tasks that they're in and guide them towards healthy decision-making skills, healthy developmental tasks, so that they have all those protective factors that are shown to help to mediate the things that put them at risk for substance use in the first place. So let's take a moment to look at the prevention history and what we've learned and what we've seen as it relates to what we're doing when we're thinking about how do we prevent our babies from using substances. So in the 1950s and 60s, one of the earliest methods that was used is something called communication-based prevention. The common methods look like fact sheets, handouts, videos, scare tactics, personal testimonials, substance use awareness and prevention campaigns, and their goals were to deter the use of the adolescents by sharing the harmful effects and different facts about substance use, and hope that this would impact their attitudes about use. But what we found is that this is actually causing ineffective and having a long-term effect on their attitudes about use. So then in the 70s, effective models became popular, where they focused on providing information about decision-making and values to help reduce use, with the hope that the personal development and self-esteem focuses would also provide a shift in their use. As similarly to the communication-based methods, we see that as standalone models, these were found to be ineffective in long-term effects of their use. So these methods were effective in a sense of increasing knowledge and awareness about substances and skills, but it had a low impact as a standalone prevention method in the prevention of initiation of use or the increase in their use. It also had a poor impact on the long-term effects of their attitudes and behaviors about substance use. And so we're seeing and we're learning that it's very, very important that we are being very particular about how we're engaging our youth and thinking about the different levels, right? The individual child themselves, their family, their peers, the school, the policies and public systems that their children are engaging in are all going to be very, 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 very important. So with the use of those effective models and those communication-based models, we've learned that there's an unintended harm. When we're attempting to give this youth information to help them be deterred from the information, it's actually caused some things that have happened on the opposite end, such as normalizing or glorifying substance use, where us giving the statistics and talking about how it's harmful and what happens has actually made you to think that, oh, wait, a lot of my peers use. This has also been found to cause fear that nothing can be done to solve the issue. For instance, a youth who may have already started using and they're learning about the information and now they might feel doomed. It also has been causing anxiety about this information, or it can even cause the opposite, where the student is rejecting the information altogether and rebelling, and so engaging in general just to kind of be a different statistic. Well, this is going to be a gateway for me, or this isn't, I'm not going to be a statistic, and type of thing, which is not always a conscious process for you. It can also increase the perceptions of how many peers are using, as well as decreasing the information or encouragement or even sharing with their peers that they have healthy attitudes or behaviors or proactive choices, right? And so when we think about what is going on in the youth's mind and world, they're really focused on themselves and belonging, right? It's a very egocentric developmental stage to be in, not because they don't care about other people, but because in this particular state in which their brain is developing, they are focused more on motivation, regulating moods and emotional literacy, and learning new things so that they can utilize the contextual cues within the social environment and their emotions to work with their prefrontal cortex, where they're able to use inhibition and decision making, and et cetera, and some of those more executive functioning skills that we desire. So at this time, I want to take a moment for us to reflect a little bit around how we're engaging our youth and sharing information with them. When we think about these unintended harms that were listed here, My question to you all is, how can this negatively impact youth seeking treatment or intervening with their peers who might be engaging in use? How could the unintended harms of how we historically shared this information with youth negatively impact them as it relates to seeking treatment or intervening with their peers? How does it influence their behavior? How does it influence their thinking? How does it influence how they are showing up with you, answering those questions throughout the assessments? Give everyone some time to type. And so, for example, while we're thinking, it's a pretty large group, sometimes it can be a bit intimidating to throw something out there. So causes fear that nothing can be done if they solve the issue, right? This might cause shame, this might cause some anxiety and increase their use or make them feel as though they can't change anything. And so they might as well just, YOLO, you only live once, and just go all out. It could potentially cause them to increase in their frequency or of use, for instance, right? Or the use of anxiety, right? Is how can anxiety impact the way that they engage with their peers, right? How can anxiety impact the way in which they are going to talk with their parents about what's happening with their peers and the peer pressure that they're experiencing, right? And so we want to think thoughtfully around the negative impact of sharing scare tactics or negative statistics about the harm of using substances, so that we are able to avoid these unintended harms, but instead shift them in the direction of making decisions that is going to give them great life satisfaction, help them to be productive citizens, have healthy confidence and self-efficacy in what it is that they can do. And so what we've learned from the last several decades of prevention history is that we have to do three things. One, we need to integrate the information about the positive behaviors and attitudes among youth. So we're looking at positive reinforcement when we're engaging with youth, as opposed to the negative reinforcement tactics that we may be doing, or those negative punishment tactics that may be happening. So in other words, the way that we can best engage youth is to use motivation, right? Increase their motivation towards the behaviors that we desire, as opposed to punishing them or shaming them or scaring them with other things. We also want to tailor it to the developmental stage and context of the audience. So when we think about all of the different roles that you all just listed before, the context is going to look different from a courtroom to a treatment room to a school setting, right? And so we want to be mindful about the audience that you are working with, right? What are the demographics of the audience you're working with? What are the particular challenges that they might be working with, especially for those who are working in community organizations, right? And the developmental stages of adolescence and young middle childhood. And so what we'll do is take a moment to look at what these developmental tasks are and how we can promote those and encourage those, so that we are targeting all of these protective factors that influence youth, right? Not only at the individual level, but also at levels of the family, school, community, policy, and public systems. So the social norms theory or approach is an evidence-based one that has the concept that sharing these healthy truths can reduce student use of substances. And it's actually, when you look at the research, it's found that regardless of the level of use that the child is engaged in, those using this approach, the clinicians, parents, caregivers, teachers, etc., have seen a reduction in the use that teens use, right? Why? Because we're saying, hey, most of your peers are engaged in extracurricular, most of your peers are being mindful of their diet, etc., those desired behaviors, right? Fill in the blank. And that, oh, well, I need to do that too, because that's cool. That's what's in, that's what's accepted, right? So we're utilizing the developmental tasks and where they are in their brains in our advantage to be able to help guide them in the direction that they need, by giving them the skill set, the tools to not only accomplish your developmental tasks, but also have those protective factors. So as they enter the world and engage with all of these risk factors that are outside of our control and oftentimes may not even be fully in our awareness, they are able to navigate with resilience. So there are two components to using the social norms theory or approach, and that is one, to gather information on the real norms, right? What is actually happening. And we're going to look more deeply at the definitions and think about how it relates to what you're doing. And also to correct the false normative beliefs, right? So we're gathering information about what's actually happening with the youth that you're working with. But then we're also shifting those negative perceptions or unhelpful perceptions or perceptions that are not true. So think about those earlier statistics that we had where the 8th graders and 9th graders had the opposite or belief about what was actually happening amongst their peers, right? And if they have this expectation or belief that this is what most of my peers are doing, it makes it more likely because of their developmental stage to fall victim to peer pressure, right? And then once you start engaging in use, their brains become vulnerable and susceptible to dependence because of the reward system that is also activated within that limbic system, which is a large part of the brain that is responsible for memory, emotional regulation, social interaction, and motivation. But this limbic system is with the primary part of the brain that is formulating in adolescence and later childhood. And so it is very, very susceptible, which is why we are working so hard to be intentional about the way in which we are encouraging you towards the right directions, right? So let's take a peek at these definitions after we look a little bit deeper at what the interventions look like, because the theory or the approach in and of itself is aiming to correct misperceived norms and strengthen accurate perceptions with the hope that it would influence our youth to engage in the behaviors that we want. It's going to increase knowledge and awareness around healthy, positive, protective norms so that they can delay their initiation or use or find themselves preventing use altogether. The research supports that social norms interventions have not only prevented and reduced substance use, but has also increased the likelihood that they intervene in a situation where their peers might be using or there might be amongst or susceptible to some unhelpful or harmful outcomes, right? So it's not saying that we don't share the outcomes and the consequences with you, but that we are being intentional about focusing and highlighting the desired behaviors, right? And we're going to talk more about how do we specifically choose a intervention, how do we specifically engage the youth so that we are able to use the social norms approach within whatever setting we find ourselves in, because this way of communicating with the youth is going to help engage their behavior towards the direction of the desired behavior. So we're using a lot of behavioral science here and within the social norms theory. Let's take a peek at these definitions and dive a little bit into how we can apply them. So when we think about actual norms and social norms, this is what most people, more specifically the youth, within their group think or do, right? So what are most youth, we're going to think general right now, even though within your application of the social norms theory, you want to be more specific, but because we're a general group and we're working across settings, what are some of the things that youth are doing in 2024? Vaping. Oh, I missed all of your answers earlier. At the right part of the chat box. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, so I want to back up just for a moment because I did not see the answers in the chat box around the question with what can that unintended harm look like and how that can impact the youth's behavior in seeking treatment, engaging in treatment, and intervening. Just going to read a couple of those questions really briefly because I missed it by having the cursor in the wrong part of the chat box here. Really briefly, that was saying that the youth might misinterpret information, they might feel judged, they might hide things, be skeptical, opening it up to subjectivity, keeping beliefs about use to themselves. Stigma related to substance use disorder is still alive and well. So being mindful about how the stigma can negatively impact the youth's expression, acknowledgement of their use. Sometimes it can cause a power struggle. It may cause them to not be honest or not engage, a defense self mechanism. And The last one I'll read here is that youth fear judgment, so they present the answers they think the audience wants, depending on whom they're talking to, right? And so when we're thinking about those unintended harms of using fear tactics, using statistics that are on the negative, showing the negative trends, how those can backfire on us. And so present, when we think about the actual norms of the youth in 2024, and scroll down to the right part here, some of the norms our babies are having at present include vaping, using marijuana, drinking alcohol, bullying or conforming, increased use of synthetic substances such as aka experimenting, benzos, legal THC products, pills, attitude, family, anxiety due to marijuana use, online cyberbullying, across the board, open-minded, low self-esteem, feeling left out, sexting, indecisive, sniffing drugs. So these are some of the automatic knee-jerk responses. So these are some of the norms that you all are seeing the youth are engaged with, right? We also have the trend of our youth being on their phones and devices and screens for 8+ hours a day on average, right? And how that's impacting them. We got video games, impulsive behavior, right? So some of these things are age-old themes and norms of adolescence, and some of these things are newer things contextually due to the involvement of technology, the legalization of certain substances, etc. And so when we're thinking about the trends and the norms or the patterns that you're seeing within your group of youth that you're working with, this is going to help you later on to identify the data that's going to be most specific and resonate the most with the youth that you're working with. So thank you all again for your participation there. If we look at the second here, the perceived norms, this is what the youth thinks about what most of their peers are doing and support. The word descriptive norm is used when referencing a behavior that they believe that their peers are doing, whereas the injunctive norm will reference an attitude that they think that most of their peers are engaged in or support, right? So what are some questions we can ask the peers to get, we kind of talked about this a little bit more, but as we think more about this social approach theory, what are some of those open-ended questions that we might begin to ask to learn more about what they're thinking their peers are doing, right? We got the perceptions about behaviors and attitudes, but let's think more specifically about what they think their peers are doing in support. Because remember, the perceptions are so influential. The social norms within their peer group, so influential, right? And so we want to be thoughtful around how can we begin asking the right questions so that we are able to create interventions, social norms interventions that are effective and that are targeted on the needs of the youth that you're working with specifically. Well, have an opportunity to practice with shifting statistics in a social norms lens, as well as critiquing a video, in addition to thinking about some other pieces of application. What do we want to ask our babies? What have been some of the consequences or rewards of usage? Getting questions around their self-image and peer pressure. Have they tried any virtual groups? What are some of the things you and your friends like to do together? These open-ended questions are wonderful, right? Because it gives the youth an opportunity to elaborate and give us information and give us help us identify follow-up questions that can really help to target and hone in on what is going on with the youth specifically. Ask how feelings handled with family, friends, and family. What do you think are the common problems facing youth today? Does use affect your driving? Mm-hmm. How does this help or hurt your goals? What do your friends think about drinking when you all get together? How are your friends spending their free time? Mm-hmm. Tell me about your ideal 24-hour day or night. Walk into a minute mark, and what is usually the first thing you see in the display cases? It's always out there. What is the benefit of using? Are you able to sleep? So Are you able to see this particular closing-ended question will help us to discern whether or not they might be using and exploring whether or not what the perception or reason for using. What celebs does your friend idolize? Which gives great insight into, hey, what are these celebrities doing, right? What are they promoting? What are their songs talking about it? Are there songs about drug use or are there videos full of that? Do you need anything to help get through the day? What's on your mind most of the day? What are your concerns about your friends' use? Great questions, everyone, right? So we're thinking about how the youth are thinking of their peers. What do they think their peers find most important? What do they think their peers believe about use? What do they think their peers are doing on a day-to-day? What do they think their peers are striving for, right? And the final question that came through here, is this where we want our life to go? So it's like a follow-up question. We're in the process of treatment where maybe we're helping to get them to think critically about the potential consequences for sure. Okay, so if we continue in this chart here, misperceived norms are those incorrectly held beliefs about the attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors of others. So if you reflect back to that initial slide that we looked at, that showed us some misperceived norms where the youth were incorrectly believing that their peers were drinking at much higher rates than they were actually drinking, right? So that would be an example of a misperceived norm. The positive, healthy, protective norms, which is what we are seeking to highlight, are what most people within a group believe and do that is healthy, positive, or protective, right? So what are the youth are focused on being engaged in extracurriculars or in clubs at school? Are they being conscious of their diet? Are they conscious of the ecosystem? Please describe in detail an ideal 4 to 6 hour period with your friends. Another great question. So in that question, describing a 4 to 6 hour period, you're able to begin hearing and seeing what type of healthy or protective norms the youth are engaged in, right? Also, some of the questions around what do you do to handle stress and deal with feelings can also begin to hint at positive and healthy protective norms, because then that's something that we as the adults will want to highlight, that's something we will want to reinforce and to focus on as opposed to focusing on that negative behavior, right? So there's a very strategic way in which we're approaching the youth so that we are not activating the shame that comes with the task of being hypersensitive about identity and acceptance and judgment. Is there anything you like? Yes, Tyra. So I'm not sure if you're able to see the screen. You should be able to see the screen here, which is we're using as a visual. There's some ways to log in to be able to see the screen. I'm going to hop back over onto the screen here where we're going to kind of take a moment to reflect again. Social norms interventions are any strategies that focus on identifying and correcting misperceived norms as a mechanism to influence desired behavior, right? So when you think about your contacts, whether that be in the criminal justice system, the child welfare system, mental health system, behavioral health, community organizations, what are some ways or strategies that you can use a social norms approach? What are some ways you can use a social norms approach with the youth that you work with? Remembering that this means we're focusing on the healthy, desired behaviors, protective behaviors to help influence in the right direction. And by focusing on that, we are challenging the misperceptions. Giving them something else to focus on, like community work, teach mindfulness, support groups, youth groups, and community organizations. Okay. So getting them involved with groups and of people who are doing the things that are desired, such as engaging with the community. And we know that when we have pro-social behaviors, that is also going to be very great for self-esteem as well as being helpful in helping to build those social skills that are significant tasks on developmental tasks. Teaching mindfulness is another protective skill that can be helpful in teaching them the coping skills, right? When we think about the challenges that often lead you to substance use, I'm seeing here that a lot of us are looking at how we can target these things by giving them the skills. Identify non-users with whom they have a connection. Incentives or rewards for getting involved. That's a great example. Incentives or rewards, right? The positive reinforcement of the desired behavior, right? So when we think about this, you also want to consider what misperceived norm are you shifting? And with the presumption of this large group discussion, the misperceived norm is that most youth use substances, right? Empowering them through psychoeducation and healthy forms of coping, be helpful in your community. How can they do that? Make a positive impact. Would you like to organize a drug-free fun event, and how? Teaching them the common techniques for all types of situations, get parents and caregivers involved. Yes, 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 right? So you all are already focused on the protective factors and the desired behaviors, those things that are going to help to build the resilience that they need to navigate peer pressure, to feel confident in being who they are and not using, even though their peers may be using, as well as that self-efficacy and that belief in that they can do these things, the refusal skills, the avoidance skills, etc. Some other ideas might be like the social media campaigns might be used, mentions providing psychoeducation. We have also thinking about like a classroom campaign, or in the information of providing information to the students from the positive, right? So let's take a look at how we can do that. Two more terms, reject the norm. Okay, so two more terms, give parents. Okay. So anticipatory socialization is the way that you think about their future social life, right? And so the idea of whether or not they have goals and what they anticipate their social life being like is also going to tell you a little bit more about their perceptions, right? Do they anticipate that they're going to go to a whole bunch of parties at college? There's going to be a lot of drinking. That might tell you a little bit about their perceptions of drugs, right? False consensus is incorrect assumption that others are like themselves in terms of unhealthy behavior. So for instance, this might mean that, well, man, everybody drinks, everybody vapes, everybody, right? Believing that most people are doing these things because, and that's because they do it and they're included in that group. Whereas the pluralist ignorance is the incorrect belief that others behave differently than themselves when it comes to healthy behavior. So this is kind of the opposite of the false consensus, where in this particular stance, the youth chooses not to engage in drinking, for instance, but believes that everybody else does because of the social norms. Make sense? And so it's just when a number of ways that these misperceived perceptions can show up, right? It can show up where the assumption is they're using and I'm an anomaly, or it can show up as in where everybody's doing this and I'm doing it too, right? So I hope these all make sense to you, what the social norms approach is. We are using the developmental task of socialization and emotional regulation, and to encourage our youth to use and engage in desired behaviors that we know are protective factors towards substance use initiation, as well as use in general. So what we'll do now is we're going to look at a video and use it as an opportunity to critique the video from a lens of a social norms approach, right? So when we're looking at the video, we want to be mindful of what type of tactics are used. How are they presenting this information? And then we'll use the chat box to talk a little bit about what we're noticing and what we might shift if we were to utilize, to provide or create a similar campaign.
As teens, people are always telling us what we can't do. Do you ever wonder why that is? Why can't I stay up late? What could happen if I just play for 15 more minutes? Who cares if I smoke a joint every now and then? Let's face it, adults may mean well, but they can't really explain why they won't let us do this stuff. The thing is, there's actually a really cool explanation, and it has to do with our brains. From the outside, the brain of a newborn looks just like a smaller version of an adult brain, but there's a big difference. There's a ton of stuff that still needs to be programmed into a young person's brain. That's where our life experiences come in. How we interact with what's around us shapes our brains until we're in our mid-20s. We can't feel our brains changing, but they are super busy building circuits and programming. So how does this happen? Every little thing that happens to us can change our brain in huge ways. At short distances, our experiences can make or break connections between brain cells. By guiding the creation of circuits, experiences shape our perceptions, memories, and everything that makes us unique. But they also affect our brain across longer distances. This involves the construction of thick bundles of fibers that connect different brain regions. By creating this complex network, Experiences help increase the brain's bandwidth, allowing it to work better and better. You've got to keep in mind, these short and long-range connections are influenced by everything we do and everything that happens to us. But this is awesome news. It means we are the programmers of our brains. Every decision, good or bad, influences how our brain develops. Let's talk about taking drugs. For example, pretend this is the keyboard you are using to program your brain. Using drugs just for fun or to get high would be like scrambling the letters on the keyboard. Now, if you scramble the letters on the keyboard after the program is written, that can lead to temporary errors or make it hard for the program to run for a while. But if you scramble the letters while the program is being written, the program can incorporate catastrophic, long-lasting glitches. This is why teens are better off without drugs. We are in the middle of coding our brains, and drugs can cause real problems that can last a long time. And yet, drugs are just one of the many possible ways of scrambling our keyboards. For example, not enough sleep, lack of exercise, or eating too much junk food can also harm our brain programs. So yeah, I get it. It's annoying to be told what we can and can't do, but I would rather focus on my ability to shape my brain through smarter decisions. It turns out we have far more control than we thought. We can use this information to choose our own paths and give ourselves the best possible futures.
All right, beautiful. So we're going to come over to the chat box. There are some great comments happening here. All right. So the question for everyone was, let's critique this from a lens of the social norms approach, right? Remembering that what we are doing is shifting perceptions, misperceptions about use, and we are targeting desired behaviors, right? And so we have here, answers are enjoying the video and explaining the concept, right? Like in the keyboard examples or metaphors, talking about drugs, also how to give another resource here at Talk Truth About Drugs, I'm sorry. So we have one, Rose says that it's a good that youth are presenting it, right? So that's the social norm approach where we have a relatable person actually doing the presentation. So one way this might happen in schools might be for team leaders or student council leaders might be the ones who are doing the surveys around attitudes and sharing some information in the direction of the desired behavior. We have here very educational, like to show this to teenage clients, strength-based, easy to understand. The video is on YouTube, Michaela. I would see different types of young people from different demographics within the information to make it more relatable. Great, Lisa. That was actually one of the questions, was thinking about what demographics would find this young girl relatable, right? So we have in a grand scheme of things, it was wonderful that they were using a teenager to speak to the challenges and pulling in the developmental tasks where teenagers feel like they're being told something to do all the time, regardless of their demographic, right? But we also want to be mindful around the other demographics such as sexuality, race, gender, etc. Using the youth as a spokesperson, Kimberly mentioned, spoken from a teen to a teen. Yes, Anaya, by making a whole series around different youth. Examples from the peer was another approach from there. I'm not sure if it's been translated, Lisa. That's a wonderful question. I imagine that YouTube probably has that function for the youth that feel like they are an anomaly and they instill fear and anxiety. So maybe appropriate for some, not others. Yes. So Chris, you speak to some really great nuances that we want to consider when we're thinking about how are we presenting information, right? So some youth may receive a video as an engaging way, whereas we may give this information to a youth in a different way, right? Maybe through music, where we maybe have a popular song that is being shown and using that to kind of begin to have a discussion around things. But excellent point. So we do want to be mindful of the youth's interests, right? We want to be mindful of their hobbies, their self-esteem levels, and things of that nature, so that we're able to navigate those challenges and nuances that may present themselves in the use of dissemination. We have here maybe have the same information with other ethical team. ethnic team representatives to share the same video. Yes, 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 yes. And so this video was created by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and I agree with you all. It would be wonderful to have this very same information shared through by different genders, different ethnic demographics, etc. So it's very, but you all are right on point with how important it is that we are being very specific about making sure that the information that is being communicated is specific and relatable to the audience that we're working with. I mean, that goes across the board when you're working with teenagers, right? We want to make sure that what we're giving them, the information we're giving them, feels like it matters to them, right? It matters to their life, it matters to their goals. And so in general, we want to make sure that when we're giving information, we're helping and to explicitly or through guided questions, make sure that we're connecting it to the youth's values as well as connecting it to their particular goals, right? And so in addition to assessing their substance use, assessing all those risk and protective factors, we also want to spend some time getting to know the youth sitting across from us so that as we're choosing interventions and strategies and mindful of how we're articulating the information that we're giving, the psychoeducation, et cetera, we're able to do so in a way that can land and be effective with the youth that you're working with specifically, right? Because they are individuals. Let's have to encourage teens questions. Yeah, so then Ryan says the one thing that can be used as well is to encourage teens questions and pose guided questions on substance use. So y'all are right on point, right? One, being very specific about making sure that the person that is delivering the information is relatable, right? And that they can, in some shape or form, also making sure that we are being mindful about what type of interventions will work best with which type of youth that we're working with. So sometimes video, sometimes music, sometimes an art exercise, sometimes it might be like a movement exercise. We typically have to get pretty creative when we're working with our youth. So excellent, 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 excellent. All right, so take a moment to look at this youth prevention so we can transition into the moment of looking at how do we utilize this more, it's actually 3 steps to look at how we can utilize the social norms approach, and we'll practice a little bit as well. So we have a youth prevention goal is to address the developmental needs that are associated with healthy youth development, right? So when we think back to those lessons we learned at a previous slide earlier in the presentation, it talked about integration, right, of information that is relevant to the youth that has desired behaviors, but also being mindful of hitting the different levels like individual, family, community, et cetera, that is impacting youth. The social ecological model really helps to understand how important it is, especially with the youth prevention and substance use treatment, for us to target and intervene at several levels, right? The peer level and individual level, this often be one of the more common ones, but engaging with the family, the school-wide system, the library or community park district, et cetera, can also be really great ways to engage in these social norms, interventions, and campaigns. We want to make sure that we're also building social emotional skills, right? Remembering that a key developmental task when it comes to the brain development in youth and adolescents is the emotional literacy and social skills, right? And so there is the emotions and the reaction of the peers, the reactions of the adults, and how those things pair together in the brain are going to have a significant outcome on the youth's self-esteem, as well as their self-efficacy or their belief about their confidence and abilities. We also want to help them build refusal skills so that when they do encounter peer pressure or experience an environment or a setting where use is common or encouraged, we want to give them an opportunity to have some pre-planned ways to exit the situation or to refuse, right? Such as, oh man, I have to do a drop for my team in a couple of days, I can't, or you know what, I just remembered I have to get home to help my mom with the project, right? So helping them to identify ways that they are able to navigate those social situations if they choose for themselves, if this is not something they desire to do. We also want to help build those self-efficacy and self-esteem skills, again, because of how important it is, and it's a developmental task for youth when we're working with them. So we are going to have the most effective prevention method or intervention when we're targeting the specific risk and needs for that target population, right? So we want to think about context. What setting are we working in? What communities are they growing up in? what challenges, experiences of trauma, right? There are going to be some more specific things we want to ask. We're going to look at the protective factors that help with some of us begin to think about some of those assessment questions and things we want to ask that have helped inform our use of this social norms approach, but also help to inform the way that we're communicating and engaging with the youth that we are attempting to support and preventing or delaying use. So real briefly, I want to kind of take another moment to get your input. What are some needs that you're noticing with youth? What are some needs that we're seeing presenting themselves with the youth today? That's what we're seeing, observing as adults and caregivers will help us to then get the answers and questions and research that we need to, and data sets that we need. We have connection, support, or factual information, sense of belonging, learning how to navigate social media, understanding and compassion, parental support, listening. Scroll back up. Understanding, I got that one. Needing ways to combat anxiety in a healthy way, pro-social supports, confidence that they have self-control. Quincy said pre-contemplation stage, which is when they may not even be considering whether or not use is an issue or something they want to quit. So I would ask if Quincy would mind elaborating a little bit on that. We have therapy, acceptance, basic needs, psychoeducation, family support. So some of these things are indicating that we need to do some case management. Some of these things are indicating and highlighting how important it is that we're focusing on the developmental stage of adolescence, right, and youth development. When we think about family support and coping skills and social skills, they need to get out and do positive things with children their age, positive peer relationships, friend support, right? And so we're noticing a lot of the developmental tasks that are present, whereas they need healthy friend peer groups, right? They may need assistance with healthy coping skills, extracurricular activity. We also have peer mental health issues that you cope with by using substances. We have being seen, support and connection from adult and peers, sexuality, psychoeducation, positive community activities, information about how to deal with this world, basic emotional intelligence and self-control, belonging. You all are hitting things right on point. And I just want to speak to the point around basic needs not being met, because not only does that come with the complexity of the stress response system being activated and overactivated, which can lead to experiences of trauma, that also can exacerbate the desire to numb or manage those skills, right? So that case management point is being highlighted here when we're thinking about the contributing factors to the overwhelm that the youth is using or the youth is having and experiencing. But the majority of youth are using oftentimes for coping purposes, in addition to the experimentation and social skill or socialization pieces. Right. All right. So you all have seen firsthand how developmentally we have to target the things that they need, those skills that they're developing and building on in the age that they are at. So let's take a peek at these protective factors developmental stages as it relates to our younger adolescents, that 11 age, and then we'll look at that 12, the older adolescent age here, right? So right before they enter adolescence, and where most people might be dealing with them in their preteen years, they go through a social developmental stage, as according to Erickson, around industry and inferiority. And what that means is that they are in that time learning how to either gain a sense of confidence and belief in their skills. So this is that self-efficacy we spoke about earlier. And this is going to be encouraged by the reactions of the adults, their parents, their teachers, counselors, yourselves, because we're very as authority figures in their lives, right? And so we want to make sure that we are encouraging youth to develop these skills, and so they have that sense of confidence, right? They have that sense that they can do it, they can problem solve, they can overcome frustration, right? They have belief in their abilities. Versus on the opposite end, if they are not receiving positive encouragement, they're not receiving opportunities to master normal developmental skills, then negative feedback can be given, or the demonstration of the skills are being prevented, it would prevent the confidence, right? Where now they might become overly frustrated and shut down, or they refuse to try anything because of the anxiety or shame that comes, which then kind of goes further into speaking to why we have to help so much with a lot of the emotional regulational abilities, challenges that the youth are coming up with, right? So if they did not have the opportunity to develop industry in their earlier adolescent, young, late childhood age, then we're going to see some challenges later on with the next stage of self-esteem and social skills, right? So we want to make sure that we are being intentional about whatever role we're in when we're engaging with youth, that we're also encouraging these developmental tasks. So I come to you all to thinking about when we're talking about industry or the competence and self-efficacy that they can do things, how do you and how can we as professionals encourage industry? Slide not advancing. So the question here is, how can we encourage industry, right? As we think about how important it is that we are nurturing the developmental tasks of the youth we're working with. You have puzzles. So activities that are challenging, provide opportunity. Hands-on activity to demonstrate effective use of pro-social skills. And that could be something as simple as having them play games together where they're practicing navigating social skills. Ask the youth to help you complete a task and praise them for their efforts. Small talk, role play. The whole family should be involved in activities. Yes, that's a great one, Natalie. Family involvement is very important. Teach a new skill and allow the youth to demonstrate that new skill successfully and provide praise to reinforce. Bring back art in school, please. Keep a curious lens. Find out about the youth's core beliefs about themselves. Encourage clients to note their own progress and strength. Praising for compliance. Another thing, you all, is important to also acknowledge their efforts and their intentions, right? Because sometimes we don't succeed when we first start something, especially when things are novice. And so we want to also encourage trying hard. We want to encourage the intention and the effort that these children are also making, in addition to the progress that was acknowledged by Lisa. We have here asking about interest, providing support and opportunities, group activities for breakout groups. It says, all right, praise them for their accomplishments, right? And so one of the things that I think is also very important when we're thinking about praise is that we want to be specific about what we're praising. So because what can happen on that unintended harm side is an increase in anxiety where they're seeking this external validation. And so we want to be thoughtful around what we're praising and affirming, right? So for instance, their values, their characteristics, their efforts, their intentions, right? We want to praise the process, if you will, and not always the outcome. So that's something I just want to make sure that we are being mindful of so that we can help our youth to have internal locus of control as well as that self-efficacy through their own encouragement. All right. Excellent. So let's look at the next stage of development when we go into what we call adolescence, right? That 12 through 18, where now that we have developed our industry, hopefully, where we feel confident and being able to learn new things and execute those things and do those things, now we're on to learning more about our identity and feeling comfortable in our identity. So during this time, the youth need support and freedom to explore. It's almost like a toddlerhood, but with greater capacity and abilities, right? Where they come, they kind of check in with parents, and then they go out and explore the world again. And this is how they develop a strong sense of self and a feeling of independence and control. So they're exploring interests, values, goals, activities, etc. Yes, we are looking at Erickson's ages and stages right now. Yes, we are. Role confusion. So when on the opposite end, if they do not have the opportunity to learn more, try new things, experience that, work through the stuff that comes up when we're trying novice things or having challenges, then they might experience something called role confusion, right? So this might be where things become very overwhelming, distressing, and they don't know who they are at any point, or they question who they are, which makes us more susceptible to peer pressure and conforming and doing and leading into behaviors around those misperceived norms that we are desperately trying to shift, right? And so when we think about this adolescent developmental stage, how are we promoting identity? exposed within reason, age appropriate. Can you say more? How are we promoting identity, healthy identities, opportunities, and support around exploration? Let's see, we said the world is exploring, the world is promoting their ID against the issue, discussion about things being seen or emulated, self-worth understanding, know your audience you're speaking with, give freedom within reason to express themselves through clothing, art, conversations. Help them look into things they are interested in, such as college, Myers-Briggs personality testing and understanding themselves, meeting them where they are, discussion of role models and perceptions, asking what they do or don't relate to. Another way we can do is I'm sure what most of us have heard about in the substance use realm, asking them for their opinions about social issues and validate. Yes, oh my goodness. Adolescents have so much insight. So much insight. When we listen to them, we can really learn a lot. We have addressed cycle spiritual needs and encourage such. Yes, yes, yes. So the values, right? So those things that are important to them. You could do something like a value sort with them. That's something you can do online, value sort by motivational interviewing creators. That can be a way to kind of help them begin exploring what they care about, why they care about it, how it's in comparison what their family says versus what they might see the world believing, et cetera. It can open up a really great opportunity for a lot of discussions. Encouraging them to try new things and live according to the priority. Let them teach you something new that they have an interest in. Oh yeah, that would reveal their identity and their industry. Encourage you to focus on or discover their talents. Reminding you that their voices matter, acknowledging what didn't work, acknowledging things you're proud of, teaching by example. Yes. So in validation, right? Remembering that validation is not saying that we are in agreement or promotion of the particular behavioral response, but that we understand perhaps why they may think and feel what they're thinking and feeling. Apologizing, right? So modeling that sometimes we're wrong, even as adults. Yes, excellent, excellent. Also gives the opportunity for adolescents to manage that vulnerability. Point out past successes and how capable or talented they are, benefits of failure and its feeling. So talking about the pros and cons, right? The duality, helping them to begin to understand duality and how that presents itself in life. Excellent, excellent, excellent examples of questions or ways that we are promoting the development of identity amongst adolescents, right? We also want to maybe get them involved in extracurricular activity, as to your points of encouraging them to explore their talents and their interests. Sometimes it might be getting them involved in park district activities and things of that nature, clubs, right? Depending on the school, there might be a number of different clubs that are available to help explore their interests and success. Then we have the internet, right? YouTube, they can explore their interests via YouTube, what they call a YouTube university. I think it's the little name they call sports, right? So there are a number of different ways that we can help to promote their identity, and validating them, listening to them, acknowledging that they matter is one of the primary ways we can promote their identity, right? Because when they feel good about themselves and like they matter, right? They can then have the courage and the desire to go out and explore as they have the intuitive means to, right? But sometimes societies can kind of push down those intuitive discovery desires due to how they're being responded to. So definitely making sure that we're valuing the identity for their uniqueness is important. Monica says that have them volunteer at a place where they see adults who went down the wrong path with addictions and where they are at now. Let them discover the danger of it with their own eyes. So instead of doing a scare tactic, helping them to volunteer, getting some experience and some self-worth and efficacy, right? And knows volunteering is helpful in promoting resilience and connection with others, but in a particular setting where they are also able to observe the potential consequences, right? Sharing your experiences as to how you overcome some of the same challenges as adolescents. Yes, that can be helpful at times, being vulnerable and transparent, challenging social media perceptions, internal self-reward and recognition. Yes. Yes. So helping them guiding that internal self-reward and recognition, right? Which can be really helpful when we think about helping to name the characteristics and processes that they went through, right? Like that was very important to you. That was very thoughtful of you. You know, you're very empathetic. You're a very caring friend. Kind of being specific about what it is that we are highlighting, because highlighting outcomes in and of itself can sometimes go to the wrong end, and it helps us to encourage an internal self-reward and recognition when they're able to recognize how they feel good when they're empathetic. They feel good when they follow through on their values, right? Especially as we know how important values are in the recovery process, as well as in understanding ourselves, right? If the youth knows what's important to them, what they are bringing to the world, they're less likely to be swayed by influences, external influences. Okay, so we have been added for approximately an hour and 10 minutes. So what we're going to do is go to look at the protective factors, explore a little bit about that, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. Okay, is that all right with everyone? So let's look at middle school protective factors, right? And we're looking at the individual, family, and school levels, while there are the levels of the greater community and public, the community, as well as like the municipality that they're living in, etc. We're going to look at these 3 specific levels. But if you recall, what we've learned from prevention history is that we have to be mindful about targeting multiple levels, right? Being a community-based process and being inclusive of the different things that influence a youth development. So individually, having mastery of academic skills such as math, reading, and writing has been found to be a significant protective factor across the board. Following rules at home and school and in public places is also a protective factor, namely because of the positive reinforcement, right? When we're getting responded, most often youth who are obedient and mannerful and are more perceived to be more likable, so they get more social interactions. We're unable to see the slides. I think there was a link that was sent out for the slides. We'll get that back out in the link again. Of course, you all can't see that. Then you have the ability to make friends, right? Do they have the social skills to make friends? Are they sitting by themselves at lunch? Are they sitting by themselves at recess? Or middle school not having recess? Are they sitting by themselves during gym and social activities when their peers are grouped together and kind of hanging out together? Do they have good peer relationships? So that looks like, are there healthy interactions happening within that peer group, right? Sometimes peers can also be really harmful to each other. So being thoughtful around what these things look like is going to be very, very helpful. Okay. So family-wise, we're thinking about consistent discipline, language-based discipline rather than physical-based discipline. So are they talking through why the decision was unacceptable? Are they talking through how they came to that impulsivity or the decision and how they can solve the problem better next time? Are they being led and guided in what is the desirable behavior for the future when that situation re-arises? And is there extended family support? These things have been found to be helpful, again, because of how these can help encourage the industry, encourage the self-efficacy that, yes, I can make the decisions, right? If there's consistent discipline and structure that creates a sense of safety and guidelines for the child, and if they have language-based rather than physical discipline, they're more likely to then be able to feel confident in what they're doing as opposed to feeling shameful, right? As well as then being able to apply what they learned from that past experience so that they are then able to make the right decision and then get that social reinforcement. The only thing you can see, everyone can see, huh? Okay. Is everyone having trouble seeing the slides? Or is it just a few devices? Looks like mainly yes. No. I can see, yes. No, we can see them. Okay. All right. So there was a suggestion around how we can maybe see. If you did click the link to get the slides pulled up, if this isn't working because technology is terrible, you can look at the slide labeled Middle School Protective Factors. This is slide number 19. All right. So if it's all right, I'll continue on to the school portion of things. We want healthy peer groups. Again, when we think about healthy peer groups, are they engaged in those healthy behaviors? Are they empathetic towards one another? Are they talking to each other with respect? Are they encouraging and holding like peer accountability? Are they supporting and honoring each other's boundaries, etc.? School engagement, are they involved in sports? Do they have positive teacher expectations, right? Do the teachers expect them to do well? Because the thing is, youth and children are very, very hypersensitive to the expectations and the responses of adults, even though they act all nonchalant about it, right? And so when the adults have positive expectations, especially teachers, it increases the likelihood, the motivation to meet that expectation, right? We have the effective classroom management. So is it contained? Right? Is there a lot of chaos happening? Is there structure happening? Is there predictability? When there's predictability and structure, that creates the safety and that creates a greater playing field for confidence to be created, for self-esteem to be mastered, and for social skills to occur, right? And for there to be a greater mastery of academic skills, which then goes back into that protective factor there. School policies and practices that reduce bullying is another really important piece that can be helpful in protecting students against the substance use and initiation, as well as high academic standards within the school, right? So again, our youth are striving towards what is praised, what is reinforced, what is encouraged, right? These things are super, super, super important, right? And these protective factors also speak to the importance of that social norms piece, where these are the things we want to promote. These are the behaviors that we're engaging, that we are attempting to help the youth engage in. So think about the nuances and processes of having healthy peer groups and what healthy, consistent discipline looks like, etc. I want to take a moment for us to think about, in your roles, how can you promote these protective factors? How can we promote these protective factors within our roles? Partner with caregivers, certainly. Yes, the question was, how can we promote these protective factors? Model behaviors. Yes, yes, yes. They are watching everything we do from birth. Have them come up with ideas that will assist them and then guide to more information. Those who discover and learn. Encouragement, leading by example, training by using incentives, providing family therapy and wraparound services, partnering with teachers on incentive systems. I scroll back up. Educating, reviewing green flag, red flags in relationships, education on signs of unhealthy relationships, provide opportunities for teens and families to engage. Yes. Be a part of each area, talk about each area. Yes. Encourage families to discipline in positive ways. Help young people identify those factors that are important to them and assist them in making these a priority, especially those that are consistent with their values, right? So helping to guide that value-based decision making. And most often, we use our values to guide decisions, even when none of the decisions are ideal, we feel better about them. Use an intersectional lens, right? So with this intersectional lens, for those who may not be familiar with that, that is being mindful of how individual, family, school, and other layers all interact with one another, right? So being intentional about not only assessing, but also intervening and targeting through those. So things like the parent engagement with the teachers. If we're doing treatment, having collateral conversations with the teachers and the adults in their life, because oftentimes they are responding to some of that. Have them create their own activity plan and sign it with you, bring in support system into the care, honesty, high fidelity wraparound, be their trusted adult, yes. Involvement of everyone around the team, yes. Show that you care. These are all amazing ways we can begin promoting the protective factors that we know will help to not only build resilience in the youth, but also to help to delay initiation and possibly even create abstinence for them. Show that you care, encourage memberships and healthy activities, encourage them to share with you triggers that occurred during the week that set them back so you can discuss with them. Yes. So opportunities, so experientially work through those big emotions that are happening throughout this developmental stage, right? How do we not acknowledge our emotions, validate their emotions, and then we can help in the process of problem solving, etc. And sometimes it's just being with them because we can't save them from vulnerable emotions. We want to help them to tolerate them, right? And use them as motivators. Right. Let's look at the high school protective factors. They're similar, but a little different because of how different the brain is in high school, later adolescence than the earlier adolescence, where in high school there is more abstract thinking, whereas in the earlier middle school, late school age, Erikson stages of development, there's more concrete thinking, whereas now they're able to begin piecing things together and related in themes and patterns, etc. So individually, the positive physical development. So are they engaged in healthy eating? Are they physically active, right? When we're thinking about the puberty that you are going through at this time, if they are having positive physical development, they're more likely to have healthier self-esteem about themselves, right? Especially given that youth comparisons are very, very common. We have emotional self-regulation. Can they identify their emotions and calm themselves down, self-soothe? High self-esteem. Do they believe in themselves and their abilities, and do they know themselves? Are they confident in who they are and where they are having the areas for improvement, right? Because nobody is great at everything. Do they have good coping skills and problem solving skills, right? So emotional self-regulation and coping skills, they overlap with one another in a way. However, the coping skills are more in the moment, interactive. How do I regulate enough to be able to think clearly in my prefrontal cortex, where the emotional self-regulation is, the process of recognizing that I am having an emotion, labeling that emotion. It's the process of using the coping skills and getting to the problem solving, if that makes sense. So it's like emotional literacy, intelligence, and regulation, all inclusive. All right. Any questions so far before we go on to family and school? Okay. Our family levels provide structure, right? So structure limits rules, monitoring, and predictability. If a child knows or youth knows that their parents going to check in on them, that their parents going to have enforcement of rules, etc., they are more likely to stay within the confinements of those limitations, right? Because again, right, even though you actively don't want to please adults, they do. Right? All humans desire social approval and social acceptance, especially youth. Especially when we think about how important the reactions of others is in the formation of our identity. Supportive relationship with family members is going to be important. So we want to make sure we're assessing these things. We're asking questions about the relationship. Who do you live with? How do can you describe your relationships with them, etc. Clear expectations for behaviors and values will tie into the structure, limits, and rules, but those clear expectations also help guide the youth. So instead of don't do this, X, Y, and Z, are we telling the youth what we need them to do, what we want them to do, what they should do instead, right? Because it's one thing to tell them not to do something, but they're doing it because that may be the only option that they have available to them. So we want to ensure that as professionals, as well as when we're working with the parents and the teachers, we're being intentional about making sure that they know what is expected and not just what is not expected. If that makes sense, right? Because and then we want to affirm and pay more attention and highlight the achievement of those expectations than we do the opposite. Okay, so there's a question that Robin Clark asked in the chat box. They asked, I am experiencing a great number of preteens or teens that are homeschooled. How can we as professional counselors have a hand in their individual family school protective factors? 20 and plus years ago, I could reach more young people in general as a church leader. We all see that the numbers in the pews are waning. Okay, so one of the things that we can do is think about the social context that we kind of have going on. So their school is more than likely in their home. So I think one thing would be just talking with their parents to find out how do they go about their homeschooling process? Do they pair up with other parents who are homeschooling? Do their children have contact with other students? How do they have contact with other peers? Because we're then going to want to, instead of it being school, it'll be their peer relationship. So wherever it is that they're engaging, maybe they participate in a park district activity, or their parents have a play date type of thing that's happening, right? That's one way. The other way, when we think about family and peers, is also having and making sure that their parents understand the developmental task of their child and is giving them the opportunity to master those skills, right? So being homeschooled is totally fine, but we also want to make sure that they have opportunities to create those social skills, to navigate social situations, etc. So how do we help parents to create those in the context for them? Additionally, we can help them connect to like virtual and community-based extracurricular activities and things of that nature that can help give them the opportunity to engage with peers more, give them the opportunity to kind of navigate social situations outside of their home. So I hope that helps in kind of thinking about how we can adapt it to a homeschool youth, right? So we're just targeting these areas, but as it looks for that particular youth. Great question, because working with adolescents, youth in general, requires a lot of flexibility. It requires a lot of conceptualization, meaning that we have to do a lot of assessment to fully understand what this individual child needs, because their system impacts so much of that development, right? Their identity, their competency, etc. All right. So if it's all right, I'll go over the school piece, and then we can talk about how we're promoting these at work, and then take a brief break. So for school, we want to have presence of mentors and support for the development of skills and interests, right? So other like peer groups, if like a high school program, do the seniors link with the freshmen in any ways, etc. How do we create opportunities for mentorship, opportunities for engagement within the school and the community, right? So that might look like student council, that might look like helping out with planning organizations, or a political club at the school, positive norms in the school. So is the school more going to have behaviors and actions of students that are more positive and pro-social, right? Are the students encouraging each other? Do they feel safe in the schools, etc.? One of the things we may have to do is talk to many students and kind of get a temperature read or a climate read on the school system and school culture in order to fully know what those positive norms are. Because as we look at the norms, how to use this social norms approach in the next few slides here, we'll look at what type of positive norms we want to highlight, right? And we have to do some assessment and data selection and identification in order to effectively utilize the social norms approach. Then we have physical and psychological safety, right? Because if a child does not have physical and psychological safety, their brain is in the limbic system and focus more on survival, right? So there's going to be a lot more impulsivity, a lot more dysregulation, challenges with relationships, etc., that comes with an overactivated autonomic nervous system. So we have, how do we promote these protective factors in our work with our youth? Dion says after school jobs, career exploration, referral to programs that provide internships. Yes. Excellent. What else do we have? There's some other ways we can promote the protective factors amongst our 12 through 18-year-olds. Functional play, prevention. Encourage the students to find ways to keep their values, provide opportunities to interact positively with individuals outside their immediate circle, to learn to identify healthy role models to engage with socially, okay? So that might be community activities and engagements, promote self-advocacy skills. There's a lot of skill building, and there is a lot of relational pieces. When we're interacting with the students, right, how can we be, for those of you working in schools, how can you be a part of a healthy school norm and presence of be a mentor for them, right? How can you help develop the skills in this positive domain for everyone working with the students, right? Or how can you implement and promote these individual levels? Rather, if you're in case management or a GAL, maybe you're making referrals and recommendations for the services that are needed to address these things. We have life skill activities, peer norm modeling, peer mentoring, Allowing them to talk through any situations they encounter that are not comfortable with and help them evaluate ways to approach the issue, right? So that's that emotional regulation and problem solving and decision making process. Vocational programs, volunteer working communities, advocating behind the scenes. These are all really great ways that we are able to begin promoting the protective factors, right? Especially when we think about those school norms and things, it might be a little bit more advocacy to Chrissy's point that has to happen around getting the school on board, the administration on board to do climate changes and to be intentional about creating positive norms and things of that nature. Okay, excellent, excellent. So encourage exploration of new cultural sports activities. You have soccer, football, tennis, join an art program, swimming program, something new like kayaking or selling or environmental programs. Encourage and help them learn what creating boundaries in relationships can look like. Yes. Excellent examples. So it is on for the East Coast, 3 o'clock, the Midwest, 2 o'clock. We're going to take a 5 minute break so that you all have a moment to process and digest. And then we'll hop in and look at a little bit more practice and how we can concretely begin to use this approach. That would be 3:05 or 2:05, depending on where you are. Sorry if anyone's on a specific time. I'm not sure what time that is. All right, all right. So I hope you had a moment to use the restroom, move your body a little, do whatever you need to do. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up the presentation. So just to review, we talked about the developmental task of adolescents and youth, where they are learning how to regulate their emotions, recognize their emotions, have self-efficacy and self-confidence in their abilities and in themselves. And so we're talking about how do we take preventative strategies that are intentional about the developmental tasks that the youth is in, and how do we then not only promote those developmental tasks, but also promote the protective factors that we know will assist in delaying initiation of use or prevent them in using altogether. And so what we are going to do now is talk more specifically about 3 simple steps we can take and begin in the process of implementing the social approach lens, and maybe thinking about how we can begin maybe putting together a campaign or intervention more specific. And I'll provide some resources at the end there that will give you greater detail in how to go about doing that, as well as some ways to find some data for yourself as it relates to trends at a state level as well as national levels. So the social norms impact basically consider the unintended impact or harm that was done when we were attempting to deter you from using by using scare tactics and negative statistics. And so what we come to question and think about is, how do we warn youth about use without creating a misperception that many or even most of their peers are using in the first place? Because we know that social activity is going to be a very, very big influencer on the decisions that our youth and the behaviors that our youth engage in. So let's look at a 3-step social norm framework that can help us in identifying how to use and share information without reinforcing the misperceived norms, right? But instead challenging those and giving them the positive reinforcement around those positive behaviors that we want to see. So when we open up with the social norms framework, we're thinking about positive norms that most youth do not engage in the use of substances, and most do not approve of use. We want to make sure we're using a reference group that is relatable to the audience, right? So if you're working in a court system, you might want to use some data from the juvenile justice system, or maybe from the different demographics or communities that the youth that you see and work with are coming from. At a school, you might do a school survey, a statewide information, depending on the context and how specific things are. You're going to want to make sure we're highlighting those positive norms, right? Because what we're seeing is that the trends for the most part, is going down. What we have in the middle, it did increase during the pandemic, but it's on a downward trend again. And then when we're in the middle of the process of engaging and sharing the information, we want to integrate a variety of positive social norms, right? Messages that avoid risk statistics, scare tactics, or distracting images. So let's think about that video that we watched earlier, right? They focused a lot on images that were showing the youth doing activities that were helpful, right? They focused on being mindful around what youth were doing and how they can empower themselves to make healthy decisions, right? They didn't open with any positive norms, but they definitely closed with some positive norms. And so in the closing, you want to conclude with a final positive norm statement, right? One that is like a bang, refresher, summarization of the norms of the youth, and highlighting the behavior that we desire for the youth to engage in that first place. So when we're choosing norms, we want to share at least one positive social norm that comes from a relatable audience, right? We talked a lot about that. You all alluded to in the process when we were discussing how to make these questions, how we are mindful of the audience that we're working with, right? Rather that be the context or the setting that you're working in, your role that you're engaging with the youth in, thinking about their demographics, thinking about their interests, their challenges, their risk factors, right? And this is one way that we'll be able to basically kind of hone in so that when we are engaging the youth and sharing these norms, it is relatable and it actually lands the way that we intend for it to land. We want to share the norms about bystander actions and protective strategies as well, right? So this might look like offering support. This might look like intervening. This might look like letting the youth that's intending to use or wanting to use know about the potential consequences and options that they have. We want to share and support positive norms about healthy behaviors in youth. That video did a really great job at that, where it talked a lot about the healthy norms. It did not go too far or deep into, oh, you're going to ruin your life, right? It even talked about the consequences being something that can have long lasting as opposed to permanent effects, right? So being mindful about the language that is being used when we're communicating to the youth the potential consequences and what can happen. The fourth point in thinking about the norms that we're choosing to share is that we want to make sure that we're sharing norms about risk management as well if substance use does occur, right? So how can we seek help? What are the different things that we could do? Find a trusted adult, utilizing the 911 phone call or other type of resources depending on what substance is being used. So these are some ways that some things we want to think about when we're selecting the norms that we want to share with the youth. We want to talk about not only the behavior of what's happening, but we also want to make sure it's a relatable audience. We want to make sure that we're talking about protective and bystander actions, as well as the different risk management things that can happen and be done as well. So when sharing these norms, we want to share positive norms from other trusted or important figures, right? So this might be a coach that they really respect. It might be a peer that they respect, like a peer leader. We might even create within the school a culture team who are trained and responsible for disseminating the information about these positive trends. You might highlight growing positive trends if the current norm is not positive yet. There's a lot of resources that I have at the end here where you can go and see, and they do a very great job at breaking down what the trends are over several year periods. We have multiple broader statements should also be paired together to summarize, as well as referencing where the data came from. So when we think about what we're working with, the setting that you're working in, what are some particular pieces that you want to think about when you consider a trusted figure or a representative to share the data? Is it you because you have a good relationship with the person, or what are some other ways important figures and trusted figures can we incorporate into the process of sharing this information? A favorite teacher? Yes. Coaches? Yes. Include people they speak highly of, that are doing positive things, or teachers, parents, coaches, exactly. So those important adults in their lives, right? Or important peers in their lives. But what would be important is that we also want to make sure that the adults and the peers also know that majority of them do not use. Unfortunately, the way that the media presents things, etc., often causes our brains to overgeneralize the statistics and the behavioral trend. So ensure that the people that we are selecting and encouraging to share the positive norms also are aware of the positive norms and what the trends actually are, because this misperception can also occur within adults. So the development and dissemination of the information, we want to find a credible norm data source, right? We want to make sure that the intended audience is reflected in that norm or that data source. It may be state or regional level, or it might be a national level. Or if you're able, depending, like if you're in school, for instance, you may be able to actually work with the students that are actually in the program or working with you all. Yeah, online influencers is another opportunity to actually use to help disseminate this information, right? The world has changing so much, so there are so many different ways we can begin to incorporate important people. When we're thinking about developing and disseminating information, the data should also target the specific behaviors or attitudes that are related to the general behavior of substance use, as well as those protective attitudes and health behaviors. So an example here is potential like a fake campaign done by Fairview Middle School that students are healthy, right? So notice they're highlighting and focusing on the fact that the students are making healthy decisions, right? 90% of students disapprove. So they're showing the peer trend in the positive direction, in the way that we want them to go. 90% of my peers disapprove, and as a youth, they're less likely to desire to engage in that behavior if the majority of their peers aren't using. Another piece they have here is that FMS students choose to never use, or that parents of students have rules against not using, right? And so we're highlighting here the protective factors, those attitudes, while also shifting the misperceived notation that the substance use is popular amongst their peers. Y'all see how how it kind of flows together and works out, where it is targeting those protective factors, targeting the misperception while also promoting the behavior that we desire to see. So when delivering, we want to flip the data to represent the trend in the opposite direction, right? So you may notice that I flipped the data in our earlier present slide, that initial slide, where we talked about how majority, 85%, right, we're not using, as opposed to 15% are using, right? So we're flipping it in opposite direction. And we want to make sure that we're locating the information on behaviors and decisions that are representative of your audience. We talked a lot about this. You all have hit on that and insinuated that through some of your comments, but it's very, very important, especially when we're dealing with teens and youth, that we are making sure that they can relate to the information, the audience, the data that we're giving to them. And then last, we want to make sure we're training the adults or students, depending on or peers, in the dissemination of the information. Again, making sure that they also understand around the social norms lens, how we want to highlight the desired behaviors and focus more on the desired behaviors than the undesired behaviors. So let's take a moment to talk about data switching, right? So frame the statistics below using a social norms approach. So we have that 8.3% of 12 to 17-year-olds nationwide report using drugs in the last month. How would that look presented in the opposite end when we're thinking about a social norms lens? By the time we reach 12th grade, 46.6% of teens have tried illicit drug use. How can we shift that and flip it in the opposite direction around not using illicit drugs, right? Around not reporting drug use. And then this last statistic here is in most states, nearly 12% of youth use drugs. How can we flip that in the desired trend that we want to see? So I'm going to give us a moment to type into the chat box. We're thinking about how are we framing the statistics, because when we find a statistic, they're going to talk about how much are doing it. But when we're presenting a statistic, we're going to flip it in the opposite direction so that we are focusing and highlighting the desired behaviors. So choose maybe one of the statistics in the chat box, let us know. So Rebecca says that roughly 92% of 12 to 17-year-olds did not use drugs in the last month. Excellent. Mary Jo, I suck at math, but this what percentage doesn't use. Yes. Robin, by the time you reach 12th grade, more than half of teens have not tried illicit drugs. Yes. Pansetta, 88% of kids across the country do not use drugs. You see this, right? So those numbers hit you differently than when you're in a car. Man, 12% do, right? It just seems differently. 88% of teens are substance free, right? So we can use language, right? We can take these statistics and not only flip the data, but use language that feels relevant to the youth that you're working with, right? You're doing a great job at flipping this data, and this is going to be helpful because the youth are driven by positive reinforcement more than they are by punitive type of responses. So the last piece to utilizing our social norms approach is to make sure we're assessing the effectiveness of the social norm, the campaign or the intervention that we're using, remembering that a social norms intervention is any strategy that is intended to assess and correct any misperceived norms so that we can shift towards the desired behavior. So we have monitoring outcomes to inform the adjustment and address skepticism, right? So we're using 3 steps to share the information. We just went over those 3, where how we were being intentional about the opening, closing, and the opening, middle, and closing, in addition to being mindful around how we're disseminating information, how we're selecting the information, etc. We want to make sure we're avoiding ineffective strategies, right? So those scare tactics, for instance, the negative consequences. We want to avoid the strategies that we know have unintended harm or unintended consequences. We also want to be mindful of the message dose or exposure. How many signs are we putting up in the school? How often are we having these discussions? How often are the parents having these discussions, right? Thinking about the message reach. Are we reaching all of the students? Are we reaching all of the parents, all of the families? How far, how effective or successful were we at reaching the audience that we desire to reach? We want to make sure there's a continuous quality improvement process happening, right, where we're shifting words and imagery, et cetera, to make it relevant and relatable. And lastly, we want to have outcome evaluations, right, where we're thinking mindfully about what we are seeking to, or what is our end all goal, right? So are we desiring to shift attitudes? Are we desiring to shift perceptions, behaviors? Are we desiring to increase behaviors, right? We have to think about what it is so that when we are designing the strategy, it's done in an effective manner. Reading the chat box. Kimberly says that language is so important. Teens hate and turn away when alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana are used, especially by adults. That's why using the word substance is a bit more teen friendly. Mm-hmm. Yes, language is very, very, very important. And so when we're talking with the youth, think about the language that they are expressing. I encourage everyone working with teenagers, take some time to get to know the youth just as a person before diving into the other stuff that you're intended to do, sitting across from them as a professional, because that gives you an in-way into understanding what's important to them, understanding the things that you want to validate and affirm, understanding what resources they may need in order to have the resilience and be successful at delaying initiation or avoiding use altogether. Okay, so I want to share the resources. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box. The resources that we have available to you. For those of you in Florida, this is the Florida Youth Substance Abuse Survey, which looks and assesses the risk and protective factors specifically to Florida across counties. For those of us who are outside of Florida, there's some national substance use data that is also done, providing national level substance use trends and patterns. And then we also have for Florida the patterns and trends of substance use for the youth as well. Additional resources include a strategic prevention framework guide to help select, implement, and evaluate prevention interventions and efforts that you're engaging in. Additionally, there is the regional youth surveys and data of risk, data by risk behavior surveillance system. This can give you some examples of questions, or you may even actually utilize this particular survey that is done annually across states and regions to help get an understanding of the attitudes and behaviors and perceptions of the youth, as well as what's actually happening, right? So this can help to provide the norms and the data that you want to use with the youth when you're engaging them. And then the sixth and final one here that will be shared is a substance use prevention communications toolkit, which provides additional guidance on implementation, evaluation, selection, and data collection as we relate specifically to this social norms approach model, okay? So those are all the resources that I have for you. I'm going to come over and check the chat box really briefly before turning it back over to Robert. Mary Jo says that sometimes we get so focused on what we have to do versus what we should do, which is gain a real connection and relationship with the youth. Yes, agreed. And especially when we think about our work with youth, if we are not present and authentic and genuine in the way that we engage them, anything, no matter how great of an evidence-based approach we're using, is not going to land and be effective, right? Even with adults, we have to be a human first and connect first. For those of us who are clinicians, but those who are not clinicians, there's lots and lots of research that supports that the alliance, that relationship that you have with your client is one of the most important components to the effectiveness and the outcomes of the work that you're doing with them, right? So take that time to be intentional about how you're engaging the youth, remembering, affirm, and acknowledge and validate and listen to them so that they are able to begin building on those developmental capacities and you're able to become that trusted person. They only need one trusted person to have resilience if they are one of those have let's say an impoverished support system. And what I mean by impoverished is that it's not sufficient and it lacks. So with that, I appreciate everyone for their intentionality in the work that they're doing with you, for your continued professional development, and most importantly, for taking the time to spend with me this afternoon and engaging in the discussions that we've had. I appreciate every one of you and hope that you each stay safe and healthy throughout this year and enjoy the spring weather that is coming. And I'll see you all sooner than later. Peace.
Thank you so much, Elle, for that presentation. I have just noticed the interactivity in the chat, and I think that speaks very highly to the content you've prepared and shared with us today, and the importance of this work. Please note a few business items before we conclude. I'm going to paste in the chat the link to the survey, a link to the video, as well as a link to the PowerPoint slides. So those are posted there now. When I conclude the webinar here in just a couple of minutes, your browser will take you to an evaluation on FATA's website. It may come up as a pop-up saying that the host is wanting to redirect you to a website. go ahead and navigate to that website for the survey. You'll also get an opportunity to complete it via email here very shortly. If you want to receive CE credits or a statement of credit for this event, you must complete that evaluation. Once you click the link to access the survey, you will be prompted to sign in or register to complete the evaluation. You can register as a visitor at no cost. You can do so by clicking Haven't Registered Yet. You must use the same email address you used when you registered for today's webinar when you set up your profile in FATA system. That is the only way for us to connect your attendance to your profile. After you register or sign in, you will be directed onward to the evaluation. You will, for CEs to be reported to CE broker for Florida licensed healthcare practitioners, you must provide an accurate Florida Department of Health license prefix and number the first time you register. If you need to add or update your license number or any other information on your FATA profile, you can do so by logging in and clicking Edit on the professional information section of your profile. The evaluation will close at the end of the day on Tuesday, February 13th. If you experience difficulty logging into your account or accessing the survey, please contact us by filling out a contact form on our website as shown on the screen, or by sending an email to training@floridabha.org before the end of the evaluation on February 13th. Please note that we do not email statements of credit. Instead, after we verify attendance and completion of the evaluation, a statement of credit will be generated as a journal entry within your profile 30 business days after the evaluation closes. As a reminder, the recording and materials used in today's presentation will be available on our website within 30 days. To access the recording and PowerPoint, visit www.fata.org, navigate to the Resource Center, and click on the training library as shown on the screen. Once again, thank you, Elle, for your time and for your presentation. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar. We'd also like to recognize and thank the Florida Department of Children and Families for funding today's education. Have a great day, everyone, and please hold for the evaluation.